Hello, in this video we're going to look at some of the places we can use tuples in Python. In particular, we're going to look at the idea of multiple assignment and of tuple unpacking. Anywhere in Python you see a comma or a bunch of commas, that's telling you that there are secretly tuples in play. So let's start with multiple assignment, a place where we can see tuples. So in Python you could do a equals 1, b equals 2. It'll assign these two variables a and b. But we can also do this in one line. So we could do a comma b equals 1 comma 2. And that will assign a to the value 1 and b to the value 2. Print them just to make sure. See, 1 and 2. And what we secretly have going on here is these things are tuples, except the parentheses are implied and not really necessary. They might even mess you up if they're on the left-hand side. Do they? No, they're okay. You could put them in left or right-hand side. In practice, you never actually see them written out. So you can do multiple assignment on a single line. The reverse of this is you can return multiple values from a single function. So if I make some kind of function here whose job is just to return some constants, we can put the multiple constants on a single line, and whether or not I wrap them as tuples doesn't actually matter. In practice, you never see the parentheses. But what this function does is it spits out tuple 1, 2. We can combine multiple assignment with functions that return multiple values to create something called tuple unpacking. So I can do a comma b equals func. And then if I print a and b, I can see that a got the value 1 and b got the value 2. And they're separate from each other. A has the value 1 all by itself, b has the value 2 all by itself. They're not connected in any sort of way. We're just using the tuple syntax as a way to do a bunch of similar stuff all on the same line. So you see this with quite a few library functions. Like if we're running some kind of integrator function, your typical call to that would be I for the result of your integration, and some kind of error estimate is equal to, say, call it integrator, and then whatever you'd have to feed to the integrator to make it work. And so you would be able to unload from this single function call both the answer to the integration and an error estimate. There are cases where you don't care about some of those values. Let's say you're doing a calculation and you're not going to use the error estimate. The convention in Python is to use the variable name underscore in that case. It doesn't have any special meaning to the Python program itself, but to a human who knows Python, they will read this as, I don't care what that value is. It's kind of like a throwaway variable. It's sort of like a promise you make that you're not going to use it for anything. But underscore is just a regular variable, just like I is a variable or X is a variable. We can also use tuples in the context of for loops to have multiple values in our for loop at the same time. So working with for loops, you might have a case where you're working with some list of values. So let's make a list, or L list here, and we'll give it values 75309. All right, Jenny's phone number. And I want to go through Jenny's phone number, and let's say I want to print the position in the phone number, and I also want to print the contents of it. I might be tempted to do something like for I in range length L. So that'll give me a counter of values 0 through, I guess 6 to give me the 7 digits in the phone number. And sorry, I didn't mean to hit Shift Enter just yet. And then I want to print out, let's say I and L at position I. Oh, I should have looked at the message it was giving me when it yelled at me. All right, I misspelled range. So anyway, we run through this, and at position 0 we have 8, position 1 we have 6, and so on, all the way down the loop. There's another more Pythonic way to write this kind of thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this up a little bit. We're going to make it for I, comma, n, in enumerate L. So enumerate's a special function here that returns a tuple. So if I enumerate this, it gives me a tuple, and the tuple, for the first thing in the tuple, tells me the index position, and for the second thing in the tuple, tells me what the value out of this list is. I can then print I and n and get the same thing. At least if and I'm having a hard time spelling right now. All right, so type it right, and we'll see we get the same output as before. And if we just want to check, what does enumerate L do all by itself? Paste it down here. All right, this is being a little tricky for us. It's technically what's called a generator, so we don't actually get the values until we need them. We can force that to happen if we use the function list. So we can see it will effectively give us a list that has a bunch of tuples in it. And so the first tuple in here is 0, 8, 1, 6, 2, 7. In fact, although this would be kind of a silly way to write it, we could do for I comma n in this hard-coded list, print these values, and it'll do the same thing. So if you give a for loop a list of tuples, you can unpack them, and then you can have multiple variables in your for loop. Let's say we had two different lists, A and B. Let's just make up some values here. And I want to use values from both of these. So how could I write this? I don't want to have to do it by hand. And I don't really want to write any tricky code that loops through this and builds tuples, because it's such a common thing that Python already has that built in. The function that'll do that for us is called zip. So if I give zip a few sequences, those could be lists or generators or anything that's a sequence of values. What it'll do, I should make these different names here. What it'll do as it goes through is it's going to make tuples, and the first tuple will have 3, 1, the second tuple will have 6, 67, 4, 5, and 5, 5. And then I can print these individual values A and B, just like I said, 3, 1, 6, 67, 4, 5, 5, 5. And we can check to see what zip does by itself. Once again, this is a generator, so it's to actually get the values out of it, you kind of have to force it. And so we can do that by forcing it to be a list. And we can see these are individual tuples that came through, and then the for loop just unpacks it into the values A, B. So enumerate and zip are not especially magic things, they're just helpful functions that build tuples for us, and then we can use tuple unpacking that's built into Python inside the for loop to get multiple values at the same time. Okay, so in this section we looked at some of the uses for tuple unpacking, assigning multiple variables on the same line, getting multiple values out of a function, combining those to have a function feed into multiple values all at once, along with using for loops with tuples.